When you conduct research, you face conflicting desires. One conflict is the desire to understand a phenomenon in depth and capture all of its complexity versus the desire to reduce things, to make things simple and testable and usable. Another conflicting desire is our desire to discover new things that we haven't thought of before. And in conflict with that desire is the drive to confirm what we already know, to test, to falsify. Both of these tensions in research play out in measurement design when we ask questions about structure. In this video, I'll describe the choice between structured and unstructured measurements. I'll explain their strengths and weaknesses and encourage you to think about the amount of structure you're going to use in your study.
Your data collection is structured to the extent that you've predefined what you're looking for, and you're merely quantifying its presence or absence. This is a structured survey question. I'm asking the respondent to quantify his or her attitude on a 1 to 5 scale. This is another example of a structured question. I give the respondent 5 choices that may reflect his or her preferences on a political party. As it's set up here, I'm basically asking the respondent to vote with 100% of their support for one of these options. Structure doesn't imply that you have to have people make really hard commitments to particular choices. In this version, I ask the question in a different way and give the respondent more latitude. I ask them to distribute their support among multiple political parties. But still, their choices are predetermined.
The article that first made me fall in love with sociology was actually a structured observational study. A disclaimer, I read this study when I was 21 and my preferences reflect what 21-year-old guys are typically interested in. The study was looked at nonverbal female courtship behaviors. Basically, it was this researcher, her name was Monica Moore, was trying to find out if women employed different body language in situations in which they were interested in meeting guys.
So here's a table from that article. What you see here is a catalog of non-verbal behaviors, and what the researchers were supposed to do was they were supposed to go to different places and count the number of times that the women who were their subjects exhibited these behaviors. It's structured because the researchers had a list of things that they were looking for, and they were basically counting their presence or absence. Now, what she did was she compared the incidence of these different behaviors in 3 different contexts. She went to a singles bar, she went to a university snack bar, a library, and a women's centers meetings. And what she found was that there was very different incidence of these nonverbal signals in places in which we might reasonably expect the female subjects to see as a potential courtship context. So if you take a look, the singles bar, the subjects exhibited a high frequency of these nonverbal courtship behaviors, like 15 to 25 on average. Now, in the other 3 contexts, the signaling behavior was much lower, but take a look, it was slightly higher in the snack bar, I guess it's a cafeteria, and it was lowest in the women's centers meetings, an average of 5 of these behaviors at the snack bar and 1 to 0 at the women's centers meetings. What do these results suggest? Well, what the researcher basically did was she drew up a catalog of potential nonverbal courtship behaviors. She found that their incidence differed depending on the context in which her subjects were, and the difference was consistent with the expectation that people would exhibit more of these behaviors in places where they thought courtship was more viable. And so now we have a theory that has been strengthened. It basically says that when young females, or when females in general, are in a courtship situation, they'll display a set of nonverbal behaviors, and that probably forms part of the unspoken rituals that guide our courtship. Unstructured data is different. When you're collecting unstructured data, You don't force subjects into categories. You don't force them to choose among pre-selected answers. You don't reduce them to a collection of predetermined behaviors that you're counting while you're observing them. Instead, what you try to do is you try to limit the influence of your preconceptions and observe a subject and see what information emerges. Unstructured data is most useful when you're trying to get unanticipated information or deal with questions for which you have little prior information. You need to know what you're looking for to use structured questions, and often we don't know what we're looking for, or at least we don't have a good grasp of what we're looking for. And in those situations, using unstructured data can be helpful. Ethnographic research is often unstructured. Somebody goes and visits a different community, lives among the people, tries to have no preconceived notions of what they are, but rather stay in close contact with them and see if they can achieve some type of deeper understanding of the community they're studying. Focus groups are often used in marketing research. Those are small group discussions where the interviewer tries to get a conversation going about a particular product or idea and sees what types of ideas come from respondents to sort of give them different angles on how to solve a marketing problem. Now, unstructured questions don't have to be observational or interview based. Survey questions can also be unstructured, and here's an example of one. It's just an open-ended question. Describe this class's strengths and weaknesses. It's unstructured because you're free to say whatever you'd like to say. You didn't receive any prompting from me. Maybe you'll answer something that I...
When you design a research project, you should consciously think about how much structure to put into your measurements. It's possible to blend structured and unstructured elements too. It's not a question of either or. You have to know the strengths and weaknesses of each to make this judgment.
Let's start with the benefits of structured data collection. There are at least 3 benefits to structured data collection. This isn't an exhaustive list, but these are 3 benefits to keep in mind: efficiency, replicability, and the control of observer bias. The first is efficiency. Structured questions are easier to answer. It's easier to answer a multiple choice question than it is an open-ended question. And people are able to answer those questions more quickly, and you can administer them without the direct involvement of the researcher. The researcher doesn't have to be there to interpret the results, doesn't have to put as much effort. You can really just get a computer to tally up their answers. And that means that you can test more people with a fixed set of resources. You can administer a survey using a Scantron as opposed to talking to people individually, for example. That ability to ask more people puts you in a better position to generalize from your findings. Replicability means that somebody else can see how you collected your measures and go out and do it themselves. Because the observation rules are very strict, you can theoretically give them to anybody, any type of researcher, and you can ask them in many different types of contexts. That ability to replicate a study puts your theory in a position to be validated by other people, and in general we attach more importance or more faith in results that have been replicated by other people. Finally, structured questions allow you to control for observer bias. That's the bias that comes from the person who's actually collecting the data from respondents. Observers are given very strict rules about how to classify people, how to count somebody as being of a particular race or having a particular income, and they have to follow those protocols. There's less discretionary power, and that lack of discretion creates a type of control. Now be careful. Just because observer bias is controlled in structured data collection doesn't mean that all bias is controlled. If you write a survey, that survey might the structure of the questions might incorporate the biases of the person who wrote the survey or wrote the rules. And so it's not a silver bullet to controlling bias writ large. It just controls a particular type of bias. Now there's at least 2 benefits to unstructured data collection. Is that you can produce deep understandings of your subjects, and you're more open to unanticipated findings. The problem with structured data collection is that people can get fixated on the potential answers that they have to code. They almost close off their ears and close off their eyes to additional pieces of information that could help us better understand the phenomenon that we're studying. When you use an unstructured method, well, you're relying on the observer to keep their eyes and ears open and maybe incorporate additional pieces of information that can develop a more precise picture or a more nuanced picture of how our subjects behave. The other thing is that it's more open to discovery. You're in a better position to find things that you didn't anticipate. It works on the same principle. If you are told what to look for, you're going to look for that, and you won't find things that you weren't looking for. At least you're less likely to find things that you weren't looking for. When you put an observer in a position to capture as much information as possible, there's a good chance, there's a better chance at least, that they can find something that you didn't think you'd find, and that creates an avenue that might lead to a breakthrough in the understanding of your subject.
So these conflicting pressures to discover new things and verify existing knowledge, or that conflicting desire to appreciate people in all their complexity versus create sort of reduced, simple explanations, comes to the front when we are thinking about how much structure to put into our studies. Again, you don't have to choose between a completely structured and unstructured study. The best way to think about these choices is when you're when you're thinking about your data collection strategy, ask, all right, am I dealing with something, a concept or a relationship that I'm already very clear on and I just want to see if it's there or not? If that's the case, use structured questions or structured observational methods. However, if you're faced in an area of your question where you really don't know what's going on, then it might be helpful to use unstructured research. Just get some hypotheses and leave it to a future study to figure out which of these hypotheses are important. No matter what your choice, it's important to think these things through clearly. If you overstructure a question and you need information, you might miss it. If you want to test a pre-existing belief, but you use unstructured questions, those tests might not be very valuable.